Hi guys, if you clicked on this video, then you chose timeline of popular Disney movies for your virtual work for today. Okay, and just like Walt Disney said on the front, I do not make films primarily for children. I make them for the child in all of us, whether he be 6 or 60. So Disney movies are for everyone. Um, I love this. I think it's so cool to look back. And these are all the old school Disney movies. And so I love looking back on them. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of a head start on your work. There are about 2 different types of questions in here that I think could cause you some struggle. Okay. And so I'm going to help you with those so we can figure out how to do an example of that question. And then for any other questions on the answer sheet, you'll know how to do it. So, when looking at this timeline, sorry, I kind of like look at myself on the computer screen. We know that this is a horizontal timeline, and we know that we read horizontal timelines from left to right, just like we do reading. And so we know the earliest date is here, the latest date is here. So the earliest date is basically the smallest number, which also means the farthest ago date. Okay, so 1937 we know is farther back than 1990. I can't get my finger there. 1992, but it's also a smaller number. 1,937 is less than 1,992. And so we see our increments. This is like a mirror, so I'm sorry. We see our increments 1940 to 1950, 1960, 1970. 1980 and 1990. So we know our intervals are counting by tens. So we have intervals of 10 on here. And remember, our increments and intervals just help us be able to place certain events on the timeline easier. So one question that I think might give you a little bit of trouble is number 2. So if you look at number 2, I circled it right here. So I want you to look at your paper, get to number 2. All right, and I want you to put your finger there with me. So, how many years ago was Cinderella released? And remember, released just means when it became available for people to watch. So, how many years ago? When we're saying that, it's like we're thinking about that question right now in our brain. How many years ago was Cinderella released? So, if I'm thinking about it right now, what's the year right now? 2020, right? 2020. So I'm thinking from now, 2020, how many years ago was Cinderella released? And so we have to look on our timeline to find when Cinderella was released. And so I want you to look right now. When was Cinderella released? And I want you to think of the year. So drop your finger there when you find it. When was Cinderella released? All right. When you look, we say Cinderella was released. Oh my goodness, this is hard. In 1950. All right, all the way back in the year 1950, Cinderella was released. So we're thinking about, okay, if now it is 2020 and Cinderella was released in 1950, we're trying to find the amount of years in between those. Okay, and when we're trying to find the time in between certain dates, so 1950 all the way to 2020, when we're trying to find the date or the amount of years in between, we have to subtract. So the 2 dates that we're using is 2020 and 1950. We're finding the in between of that. So when we subtract, we know we have to start with the higher number. What's higher, 2020 or 1950? We know 2020 is higher, or the larger number, it would be farther down on the timeline. So I'm going to write 2020 minus 1950, okay? And you can probably write that in like the margin on your paper. I'm going to write it on a little Post-it for you. So I want you to do that math right now in the corner of your paper. If I might be going a little fast, I want you to pause it and I want you to try to do it. So 2020 minus 1950. Make sure it is lined up correctly. Do that math. All right. Did you do that math? Okay, press play. If you haven't already. And so 2020, if you do your math, Subtract, subtract, subtract. 70 years. So Cinderella was released 70 years ago. So then you would write 70 years for number 2. There are going to be some more questions like that. Like I'm looking at number 5. How many years ago was the movie Pinocchio released? You will do the same sort of thing. How many years ago? I'm thinking from 2020, the time Pinocchio was released. Find that in between time. Got it? Okay. So I then want to look at number 6. So find number 6 on your paper. Number 6 says, how many years after the release of Lady and the Tramp was The Little Mermaid released? Okay, so we're looking at 2 different release dates, The Lady and the Tramp and The Little Mermaid. So how many years after the release of Lady and the Tramp was The Little Mermaid released? So if we look at our timeline, we know The Lady and the Tramp came first, and then a little bit later on, The Little Mermaid was released. I want you to take both your fingers and find Lady and the Tramp and then The Little Mermaid, okay? And I want you to find those 2 dates. We are looking for the time in between those 2 dates. So very similar to how we just found the time between 2020 and 1950. We're going to do the same thing with Lady and the Tramp and The Little Mermaid. So we would look. Here is The Lady and the Tramp right here in 1955. From 1955 to 1989, then The Little Mermaid was released. How much time was in between that? We have to do subtraction again. Remember, I have to start with the latest date or the biggest number. So it will be 1989 minus 1955. I want you to do that right now. I'm going to do it too. 1989 minus 1955. Do that math. You can pause me if you're working. Pause. And then unpause when you're done. 1989 minus 1955, 34, it's blurry, 34 years, okay? So that's the amount of time in between 1955 and 1989, okay? There are going to be a few more questions like that, so I want you to remember what we did together so you can answer those questions, okay? All right. Hope this makes sense. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. I think you'll do a great job with the rest of that. And so, awesome job. Thank you for watching. Bye. Let me get myself situated.